The soot-stained girl kneeling beside the charcoal pit looked up at Harrison Drake with eyes so blue they seemed to pierce through the smoke-thick air of the Colorado mountains. And in that single moment of their meeting in the summer of 1878, his world shifted on its axis in a way no amount of wilderness survival had prepared him for. Harrison had been tracking an elk through the dense pine forests north of El Dorado when he stumbled upon the charcoal operation tucked into a narrow valley. The acrid smell of burning wood had reached him first, followed by the sight of earthen mounds smoking steadily in the clearing. He had planned to pass by without stopping, but then he saw her. She wore a dress that might have once been blue but was now the color of ash and earth. Her hands, blackened to the wrists, worked methodically at tending the smoldering wood. Dark smudges covered her cheeks and forehead, and her hair was tied back with a strip of cloth that had long since lost its original color. She could not have been more than 20 years old, yet her movements held the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this work for many years. "Who are you?" The voice came not from the girl but from an older man emerging from a rough-hewn cabin at the edge of the clearing. He was gaunt, with a hollowed look about him that spoke of illness or hunger or both. "Name is Harrison Drake," Harrison said, keeping his hands visible and his voice steady. "I am tracking game through these mountains. I meant no trespass." The older man studied him with sunken eyes. "You are a long way from town, mister. I prefer the high country." Harrison stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and arms thick with muscle from years of hauling traps, chopping wood, and wrestling with the raw elements of mountain life. His dark hair fell past his collar, and a beard covered the lower half of his face. He knew he looked wild, like something that belonged more to the forest than to civilization. The girl had risen to her feet, watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Up close, even through the layers of soot and grime, he could see the delicate structure of her face, the intelligence in those startling blue eyes. "This is my daughter, Marianne," the old man said, then was seized by a fit of coughing that bent him double. Marianne moved quickly to her father's side, supporting him with surprising strength for someone so slight. "Papa, you should rest." "I am fine," he wheezed, but even Harrison could see the lie in that. The man was not fine. He looked like death was already reaching for him. "You need water," Harrison said. "Unshoulder his pack." He pulled out his canteen and offered it to the girl, not the father. She hesitated for just a moment before taking it with blackened fingers, her eyes meeting his with something that might have been gratitude or wariness or both. Her father drank deeply, then sagged against her. "Help me get him inside," Marianne said, and Harrison did not hesitate. He moved to the old man's other side and took most of his weight, feeling nothing but skin and bones beneath the worn shirt. Inside the cabin, conditions were even worse than he had expected. A single room with a dirt floor, a broken stove in one corner, a rough table with 2 chairs, and 2 narrow beds covered with threadbare blankets. The walls had gaps where the chinking had fallen out, and the whole structure leaned slightly to one side. This was poverty of the deepest kind, and it made something twist in Harrison's chest. They laid the old man on one of the beds. Marianne moved to wet a cloth from a bucket, but Harrison could see the water was nearly gone. "There is a spring about a quarter-mile east of here," he said. "I passed it on my way up. Good clean water." She looked at him with those blue eyes, and for the first time he saw real emotion break through the carefully controlled surface. "I know where it is. I fetch water from there twice a day." "When did you last eat?" The question came out more bluntly than he intended, her chin lifted slightly. "We manage." "That was not what I asked." She turned away from him, wringing out the cloth. "We had bread yesterday." "Yesterday." Harrison felt anger kindle in his gut, not at her but at the circumstances that had brought a young woman and her dying father to this state. "I have supplies. Let me bring them in. We do not need charity." Her voice was quiet but firm. "It is not charity, it is being neighborly." He was already moving toward the door. "I will be right back." Outside, he took a moment to breathe in the cleaner air and look around the clearing with more attention. The charcoal operation was small but well maintained. 3 earthen mounds stood in various stages of production, and stacks of wood were arranged in careful piles. Someone had put a great deal of work into this place. Tracks in the dirt told him that a wagon came through periodically, probably to collect the finished charcoal and bring new supplies. But those supplies clearly were not enough. He gathered what he could spare from his pack, which was more than he usually would have given to strangers. Dried venison, hardtack, coffee, beans, a small sack of cornmeal. He had been planning to replenish in town in a few days anyway. He could hunt for fresh meat in the meantime. When he returned to the cabin, Marianne was sitting beside her father's bed, holding his hand. The old man had fallen into an uneasy sleep, his breathing shallow and ragged. She looked up as Harrison entered, and he saw she had wiped some of the soot from her face, though plenty remained. "I do not know how to thank you," she said quietly. "No thanks needed." He set the supplies on the table. "Your father needs a doctor. The doctor in El Dorado will not come up here, not for people like us." There was no bitterness in her voice, just a statement of fact that made his anger burn hotter. How long has he been sick? 3 months, maybe 4. It started as a cough. She stood and moved to the table, looking at the food he had brought with an expression he could not read. "The charcoal work makes it worse. The smoke gets in his lungs, but we have to keep producing or the merchant will not come back." Harrison watched as she touched the packages of food gently, as if they might disappear if she pressed too hard. "What merchant?" "Horace Sterling from El Dorado. He supplies us with what we need and buys our charcoal. He sells it to the smelters and the blacksmiths." She picked up the coffee, breathing in the scent through the canvas wrapping. "We have not had coffee in months." "Make some now," Harrison said. "I will build up your fire." She looked like she wanted to protest, but the desire for coffee won out. While she set about preparing it with the precious grounds he had given her, Harrison went outside to examine the stove situation more closely. The stove was indeed broken, but the fire pit outside would do. He gathered kindling and built up a proper fire, then filled the dented coffee pot with water from the bucket and set it to boil. By the time he returned inside, Marianne had changed into a slightly cleaner dress, though it was just as worn as the first. She had also washed her face and hands, and he could see her properly now. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fine clothes or careful grooming. It was something in the set of her features, the directness of her gaze, the strength that showed despite her circumstances. "The water is heating," he told her. "Come outside where the air is cleaner." She glanced at her father, clearly reluctant to leave him. "He is sleeping. You can watch from the doorway." That compromise worked. They sat on the rough bench outside the cabin door, where she could keep an eye on her father while they waited for the water to boil. The smoke from the charcoal mounds drifted across the clearing, and Harrison could hear the faint crackle of the wood burning deep inside the earthen structures. "How long have you been doing this work?" he asked. "Since I was 12. My mother died that year. Fever took her in the winter." Marianne's voice was steady, as if she had long ago accepted these hard truths. "My father was a logger before, but he got injured, and we needed something he could do without so much heavy lifting. A man he knew taught him the charcoal burning trade." 8 years, Harrison said quietly. "You have been doing this for 8 years. It is honest work." "I did not say it was not." He turned to look at her profile, the way she kept her spine straight despite everything. "You are stronger than you know." She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I do what needs to be done. That is not strength. That is just living. It is both." The water began to steam, and she rose to add the coffee grounds. The smell that rose from the pot was heavenly, rich and dark and full of promise. She poured them each a cup in tin mugs that were battered but clean, and they sat together in companionable silence, drinking the hot, bitter liquid as the afternoon sun slanted through the pines. "Why are you really up here?" Marianne asked after a while. "Men like you usually do not wander this far into the high country without a reason. Men like me, mountain men, trappers, whatever you are." She gestured at him with her mug. "You have that look about you, like you belong out here more than in town." Harrison considered how much to tell her. "I trap in the winter, pan for gold sometimes in the summer. I have a cabin about 10 miles north of here, higher up. I come to El Dorado maybe once every few months for supplies. The rest of the time, I am on my own. That sounds lonely. It is peaceful." He finished his coffee and set the mug down. "Or it was. Now I am not so sure." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them that made his heart beat faster. "You should go before it gets dark. These trails are not safe after sunset." "I know the trails." But he stood anyway because she was right about one thing. He needed to make a decision. Walk away from this place and never think about the soot-covered girl and her dying father again, or do something that would change the course of his carefully solitary life. "I will come back tomorrow." "You do not have to, I know." He gathered his pack and rifle. "I will come back anyway." The walk back to his cabin took him 3 hours in the fading light. The whole way his mind turned over what he had seen. Marianne Palmer and her father were in desperate circumstances, and pride alone was keeping them from seeking help. But pride would not save the old man's life, and it would not keep Marianne fed through the coming winter. Harrison's cabin was a solid structure of notched logs with a stone fireplace and real glass in the windows. He had built it himself over the course of 2 summers, making it strong enough to withstand the brutal mountain winters. Inside, everything was neat and organized in a way that came naturally to a man who lived alone. His traps hung on the wall, his few possessions stored carefully on shelves he had hewn himself. A bearskin covered the floor, and his bed was piled with warm furs. He had chosen this life deliberately after leaving behind a past he did not care to remember. 5 years ago, he had walked away from everything and everyone he knew and headed into the mountains to find peace in solitude. For the most part, it had worked. Out here, there were no expectations, no disappointments, no betrayals. Just the honest struggle of survival and the quiet satisfaction of self-sufficiency. But now, lying on his bed and staring at the ceiling, all he could see was a pair of blue eyes looking at him through a mask of soot. True to his word, Harrison returned to the charcoal camp the next morning. He brought more supplies this time, including medicine he had been saving, some willow bark for fever, and herbs that might help ease the old man's cough. He also brought fresh meat from a deer he had brought down at dawn. Marianne was tending the charcoal mounds when he arrived, raking ashes and checking the ventilation holes. She looked up at his approach, and something like relief crossed her face before she schooled it back to neutral. "You came back." "I said I would." He dismounted from his horse, a sturdy mountain pony he had named Storm. "How is your father?" "The same, maybe a little worse." She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a fresh smear of ash. He did not sleep well. Harrison brought his supplies inside. The old man was awake but looked terrible in the morning light. His skin had a grayish cast and his breathing sounded wet and labored. "Mr. Palmer," Harrison said, crouching beside the bed. I brought some things that might help. You are a good man, the old man wheezed. But I fear. It is too late for me. Papa, do not talk like that. Hush, girl, we both know the truth. He reached for her hand and she took it, kneeling beside the bed. You are a good daughter, the best, but you cannot keep doing this alone. I will manage. No. The single word came out with surprising force. Promise me, when I am gone, you will go to town, find decent work. Stop this. Tears ran down Marianne's face, cutting clean tracks through the soot. I promise, Papa. The old man's eyes found Harrison. Take care of her, please. It was not a request a dying man made lightly to a stranger. Harrison felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. I will. Satisfied, Mr. Palmer closed his eyes and slipped back into an uneasy doze. Marianne stayed kneeling beside him for a long moment before she finally stood and walked outside. Harrison followed. She stood in the clearing with her arms wrapped around herself, looking small and lost despite the strength he knew she possessed. He is going to die. Yes, Harrison said, because there was no point in lying. I always knew it would happen, but knowing and living through it are different things. He moved to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that she would know she was not alone. You do not have to go through it alone. Why are you doing this? You do not know us. Harrison had been asking himself the same question. The easy answer was that it was the decent thing to do, that any man with a conscience would help people in need. But the real answer was more complicated and had everything to do with the way his heart had started beating differently from the moment he first saw her. Maybe I am tired of being alone, he said finally. She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw a crack in her armor. I do not even know you. My name is Harrison Drake. I am 28 years old. I came to Colorado 5 years ago from Missouri. I built a cabin in the high country and have been living there alone ever since. I trap, hunt, and occasionally pan for gold. I have not had a real conversation with another person in 3 months before yesterday. He paused. What else do you want to know? A smile ghosted across her lips, there and gone in an instant. Why did you leave Missouri? Because I was tired of pretending to be someone I was not. It was more truth than he usually gave anyone. Out here I can just be. I understand that. She turned back toward the charcoal mounds. Out here, nobody cares that I am covered in soot and live in a broken cabin. The work is what matters. You are more than your work. Am I? She shook her head. I do not even remember what I am underneath all this anymore. Harrison reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not move, he gently took her wrist and turned her hand palm up. The skin there was stained black, the lines of her palm etched in charcoal dust. The soot does not change who you are, it is just on the surface. Easy for you to say, you are not the one covered in it. I have been covered in worse. He released her hand carefully. Blood, mud. The guts of 100 trapped animals. The mountains do not keep a man clean. That surprised a real laugh out of her, short but genuine. I suppose not. Let me help you today. Show me what needs to be done. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right. But if you are going to work with charcoal, you will get as dirty as me. I can live with that. Marianne spent the morning teaching him the intricacies of charcoal burning. It was more complex than he had realized. The wood had to be stacked in precise arrangements inside the earthen mounds, with ventilation shafts carefully positioned to control the burn. The fire had to be hot enough to char the wood, but not so hot that it turned to ash. It required constant attention, checking and adjusting, adding earth to seal gaps, opening and closing vents. The whole process takes about a week, she explained as they worked together to adjust one of the mounds. Maybe 10 days depending on the weather. When it is done, you have to let it cool completely before you open it up. Otherwise, it will catch fire and you lose everything. How much can you produce? On a good month, about 30 bushels. Mr. Sterling pays us 75 cents a bushel, so that is about $22. She wiped sweat from her forehead. Out of that, we have to buy food, supplies, replace tools. There is not much left over. $22 a month. Harrison made more than that in a week of trapping during the winter. The injustice of it gnawed at him. Sterling is robbing you. Charcoal sells for at least $2 a bushel in town. I know, but he is the only merchant willing to come up here, and we cannot haul it down ourselves, so we take what he offers or we starve. She moved to the next mound with the practiced efficiency of long experience. That is just how it is. It should not be. Should not be does not put food on the table. They worked through the afternoon, and Harrison found himself enjoying the simple rhythm of the labor and the quiet companionship of working alongside Marianne. She was a patient teacher, explaining everything clearly and never making him feel foolish for not knowing. And as they worked, she began to open up in small ways. She told him about her mother, who had loved to sing and had taught Marianne all the old songs. About growing up in the mountains and never quite fitting in on the rare occasions they went to town. About dreams she had once had of becoming a teacher, back before her mother died, and those dreams had to be set aside. I can read and write, she said with a touch of pride. My mother made sure of that. She said a woman needed education more than a man did because the world would try harder to keep her ignorant. Your mother was a wise woman. She was. Marianne paused in her work, looking out at the mountains rising all around them. She would have liked you, I think. She always said the measure of a man was what he did when nobody was watching. What have I done to measure well? You came back. She said it simply, as if that explained everything, and maybe it did. By the time the sun began to set, Harrison was as covered in soot and ash as Marianne. His hands were black, his clothes were filthy, and he could feel grit in his hair and on his face. But he felt something else too, a sense of purpose he had not experienced in a long time. They checked on Mr. Palmer, who had not woken all day. His breathing was worse, shallow and irregular. Marianne sat with him while Harrison prepared the food he had brought, making a simple stew with the venison and some vegetables from his stores. They ate outside as the stars began to appear, sharing the single pot between them. You should stay, Marianne said quietly. It is too dark now to travel safely. Harrison knew the trails well enough to make it home in the dark, but he did not argue. I will sleep outside by the fire. You could sleep in the cabin. There is room. Your father is there. It would not be proper. She was quiet for a moment. Thank you for thinking of that. Most men would not. I am not most men. No, she agreed, looking at him in the firelight. You are not. That night, wrapped in his bedroll beside the fire, Harrison stared up at the vast expanse of stars and knew his life had changed. He could not walk away from this place now. Could not leave Marianne to face what was coming alone. Whatever happened, he would see it through. Mr. Palmer died 3 days later, just as the sun rose over the eastern peaks. He slipped away peacefully in his sleep, with Marianne holding his hand and Harrison keeping vigil from the doorway. When she finally stood and turned to him with red-rimmed eyes, Harrison opened his arms and she walked into them, letting herself be held while she cried. They buried him in the clearing, beneath a pine tree with a view of the mountains he had loved. Harrison carved a marker from a piece of oak while Marianne washed her father's body and wrapped him in his cleanest shirt. Together they lowered him into the ground and covered him with earth. Marianne said a prayer, her voice steady despite the tears that ran down her face. He was a good man, she said when the prayer was done. He did his best for me. That is all anyone can ask. It is, Harrison agreed. They stood there for a while in silence, paying their respects. Then, practical even in grief, Marianne turned back to the cabin. I need to shut down the charcoal operation, bank the fires and seal everything properly. Otherwise, all the work will be wasted. I will help you. It took them most of the day to properly close down the mounds and secure the site. When it was done, Marianne stood in the clearing and looked around at the place that had been her home and her prison for 8 years. "What will you do now?" Harrison asked. "I do not know." She pushed a strand of hair back from her face, leaving a smudge of ash on her temple. "I promised Papa I would go to town and find work, but I have no skills except this. Who will hire a charcoal burner's daughter? Come with me." The words were out before Harrison fully thought them through, but once said, he did not want to take them back. She looked at him with wide eyes. "What? Come with me to my cabin. Stay there while you figure out what you want to do next." He spoke quickly, trying to make his case before she could refuse. "You should not be alone right now, and I have room, plenty of room. It would be no trouble." "Harrison, I cannot just move in with you." "People would talk." "What people? The only person who comes near my cabin is me." He took a step closer. "I know it is not proper, but I am not suggesting anything improper. You would have your own space. I would not. I just want to help." She searched his face, and he let her see everything he was feeling. The concern, the desire to protect, and yes, the attraction that had been growing stronger every day they spent together. He would not lie about that, even if it complicated things. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why do you care what happens to me?" "Because from the moment I saw you, covered in soot and tending those fires, I saw something in you that called to something in me." He held her gaze. "Because you are brave and strong and kind, and the world has been cruel to you, and I want to be the thing that is gentle. Because I am tired of being alone, and I think maybe you are too." "I am," she whispered. "So tired of being alone." "Then come with me, just for now. We can figure out the rest as we go." She looked back at the cabin, at her father's grave, at the charcoal mounds that had defined her life for so long. Then she looked at Harrison, and he saw the moment she decided to trust him. "All right, I will come with you." They left the next morning after packing what little she wanted to keep. The rest, they left for whoever might find the place next. Harrison loaded her belongings onto Storm while Marianne took one last look around, saying goodbye to the only home she had known for most of her life. The journey to his cabin took most of the day, following mountain trails that climbed steadily higher. Harrison kept the pace easy, giving Marianne time to adjust to the altitude and the rough terrain. She was tougher than she looked, never complaining even when the path grew steep and difficult. When they finally emerged into the clearing where his cabin stood, the sun was beginning to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Marianne stopped and stared. "It is beautiful," she said softly. Harrison looked at his cabin with fresh eyes, trying to see it as she did. The solid log walls, the stone chimney, the wide porch he had built to sit on during summer evenings. The cleared land around it, the garden plot he maintained, the stream running clear and cold just beyond the trees. He had built all of this with his own hands, creating a home in the wilderness. "Welcome," he said simply. Inside, he showed her around the single large room that made up his living space. "You can have the bed. I will sleep out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed." "Yes, you can." He set her things down carefully. "I have plenty of furs. I will be comfortable." She looked like she wanted to argue but was too tired. "Just for tonight. We can argue about it more tomorrow." He moved to build up the fire. "For now, you should rest. It has been a hard few days." Marianne sat on the edge of the bed, looking around at his neat cabin with something like wonder. "You built this yourself? Every log? It must have taken forever. 2 summers. But I had nothing but time." He filled a pot with water from the bucket by the door. "Are you hungry?" "A little." He made them a simple meal of beans and bacon, with bread he had baked 2 days ago. They ate together at his table, and Harrison found himself watching her, learning her small gestures and expressions. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the slight furrow that appeared between her brows when she was thinking, the rare smile that transformed her whole face. "Thank you," she said when the meal was done, "for everything. I do not know what I would have done without you. You would have managed, you always do, maybe. But I am glad I did not have to." She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening mountains. "It is strange. I have lived in these mountains all my life, but I have never felt as safe as I do right now." Harrison came to stand beside her. "You are safe here. I promise you that." She turned to look at him, and the space between them felt charged with possibility. For a moment he thought she might kiss him. For a moment he wanted her to. But then she stepped back, putting proper distance between them. "I should sleep. Tomorrow I can start earning my keep. There must be things I can help with. You do not need to earn anything." "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm. "I will not be a burden. If I am going to stay here, I want to contribute." Harrison could see there was no point in arguing. Pride again, but he was beginning to understand that her pride was part of what had kept her alive and strong through years of hardship. "We can talk about it in the morning." That night, lying by the fire wrapped in furs while Marianne slept in his bed, Harrison stared at the ceiling and wondered what he had gotten himself into. He had invited a woman to live in his cabin, a woman he barely knew but felt drawn to in ways he had not experienced in years. It was reckless and foolish and wonderful all at once. From the bed, he heard her sigh in her sleep, a soft sound that made his chest tighten. He wanted to protect her, to give her the safety and comfort she had been denied for so long. But he also wanted more than that. He wanted her trust, her companionship, her heart. It was too soon for such thoughts. She was grieving, vulnerable, dependent on him for shelter and safety. The honorable thing would be to keep his distance, to help her as a friend and nothing more. To wait until she was on her feet again before he even considered pursuing anything deeper. Harrison had always tried to be an honorable man. But as he lay there listening to her breathe in the darkness, he knew this was going to test his honor in ways he had never imagined. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and strange. Marianne refused to be idle, throwing herself into helping with every task she could find. She mended his clothes, organized his supplies, tended the garden, and even helped him with the heavier work when he would let her. She was strong from years of physical labor, but Harrison made sure she did not overdo it. He found himself being protective in ways that surprised him, always making sure she ate enough, rested when she needed to, did not push herself too hard. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, occasionally rolling her eyes but never truly objecting. As they worked side by side, they talked. Harrison found himself telling her things he had never told anyone. About his childhood in Missouri, the youngest son of a farmer who had expected him to follow in his footsteps. About the girl he had planned to marry, who had chosen his older brother instead. About the anger and betrayal that had driven him west, looking for a place where he could start over. "Do you regret coming here?" Marianne asked one afternoon as they harvested vegetables from the garden. Harrison considered the question seriously. "No. That pain brought me to a better place. I would not go back and change it even if I could." That is a generous way to look at betrayal. "It took me a while to get there." He pulled up a carrot and examined it. "For a long time I was just angry, at her, at him, at myself for not seeing it coming. But anger is exhausting. Eventually, I realized I was happier alone in these mountains than I would have been in a marriage built on obligation." Marianne was quiet for a moment. "Do you ever get lonely?" "I did not think I did." But then I met you, and I realized I had just been alone so long I forgot what it was like to have someone to talk to." She smiled at that, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and made something warm bloom in his chest. She was beautiful when she smiled, though she did it too rarely. Harrison found himself trying to coax those smiles out of her whenever he could, saying things that might amuse her, showing her small wonders around the cabin. One morning, he took her to a meadow about a mile from the cabin where wildflowers grew in riotous profusion. The sight made her stop and catch her breath. "I have never seen anything like this," she said, walking into the sea of color. Lupines and columbines, Indian paintbrush and mountain bluebells, all mixed together in a tapestry of blues and reds and yellows. "It blooms like this every summer," Harrison told her. "I found it my first year here and thought I had stumbled into paradise." Marianne bent to touch a delicate blue columbine, her fingers gentle on the petals. "Why did you bring me here?" "Because I wanted to see you smile. And because you have spent too much of your life covered in soot and ash. I thought you deserved some color." She straightened and looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You are a good man, Harrison Drake." "I try to be." "No, you are, whether you try or not." She picked a handful of flowers and brought them to her face, breathing in their scent. "Thank you for this, for everything." They stayed in the meadow for over an hour, and Harrison pointed out the different flowers and told her what he knew about each one. She listened with the focused attention she brought to everything, asking questions and occasionally laughing at some story he told. The sound of her laughter was becoming his favorite thing in the world. On the way back to the cabin, they walked side by side, close enough that their hands occasionally brushed. Each touch sent electricity up Harrison's arm, and he wondered if she felt it too. But she gave no sign, and he did not push. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Marianne finally brought up the question he had been expecting. "I cannot stay here forever," she said quietly. Harrison's stomach tightened, but he kept his voice even. "I know. I need to figure out what I am going to do. Where I am going to go." She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "I have been thinking maybe I could find work in El Dorado as a laundress or a cook, something respectable." "You could do that," he paused, "or you could stay here." "Harrison." "I am not suggesting anything improper," he said quickly. "But there is no reason you could not stay in the area. I could help you build your own cabin, somewhere close but separate. You could start a business, maybe growing vegetables to sell in town, or you could pan for gold in the streams. Some women do that and make decent money." She turned to look at him. "Why would you help me do that?" "Because I do not want you to leave." There it was, the truth laid bare. "I like having you here, Marianne. I like talking to you and working with you and hearing you move around the cabin. For 5 years I thought I wanted to be alone. But now I know I was just waiting for the right person to share this life with." "The right person," she repeated softly. "You," he held her gaze. "If I am being too forward, tell me. If you want to go to town and start fresh without any complications, I will help you do that too. But I wanted you to know how I feel, that you have options, that you do not have to figure everything out right now." Marianne was quiet for a long time, watching the colors fade from the sky. "I care about you," she said finally. "More than I probably should, given how little time we have known each other, but I do not know if I can trust these feelings. My whole life just fell apart. My father died. My home is gone. Maybe what I feel for you is just gratitude or fear of being alone or something else that is not real." "Maybe," Harrison agreed. "Or maybe what you feel is exactly what I feel, something real and true and worth exploring. How do we know the difference? Time, I suppose, and honesty." He shifted to face her more fully. "I am not asking you to decide anything tonight, or this week, or even this month. Stay as long as you need to figure things out. If you decide you want to leave, I will help you. If you decide you want to stay, we will figure that out too. I am not going anywhere." She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Her palm was calloused from work but warm and strong. "I do not want to hurt you. Then do not lie to me. Be honest about what you are feeling, even if you are not sure what that is." He squeezed her hand gently. "That is all I ask." They sat together holding hands as the stars came out, and Harrison felt something settle in his chest. This was right. Whatever happened, this moment was exactly where he was supposed to be. As summer deepened into late August, Marianne began to relax into life at the cabin. The constant worry that had lined her face began to ease. She smiled more often. She sang sometimes while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her, and the sound of her voice filled the cabin with warmth. Harrison taught her to fish in the mountain streams, standing behind her to show her how to cast the line, his arms around her in a way that felt both innocent and charged with possibility. She caught her first trout and laughed with pure delight, holding up the shining fish like a trophy. "I did it," she exclaimed. "You did." He could not stop grinning at her joy. "You are a natural. Maybe I should be a fisherwoman instead of a laundress. Maybe you should be whatever makes you happy." She looked at him then, still holding the fish, still smiling, and something in her expression made his breath catch. "I think I am figuring out what that is." The kiss, when it finally came, happened on an ordinary evening doing ordinary things. They were preparing dinner together, moving around each other in the small space of the cabin with the ease of long practice. Marianne was cutting vegetables while Harrison tended the pot on the fire. She said something that made him laugh, and when he turned to respond, she was right there, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her blue eyes. They both stopped moving. The space between them seemed to shrink and expand all at once. Harrison reached up slowly and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "Marianne," he said, his voice rough. "Yes." It was all the permission he needed. He leaned down and kissed her, gently at first, giving her every chance to pull away. But she did not pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, and kissed him back. The world seemed to stop. There was only her, the softness of her lips, the warmth of her body against his, the way she sighed into his mouth like she had been waiting for this too. He wrapped his arms around her and pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, and she melted into him with a trust that made his heart ache. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marianne rested her forehead against his chest. He could feel her trembling slightly, and he held her carefully, giving her time to process what had just happened. "I am sorry," he said. "If that was too soon." "It was not too soon." She looked up at him, her eyes bright. "I wanted you to kiss me. I have wanted it for weeks." Relief flooded through him. "I have wanted to kiss you since the day I met you." That made her laugh. "When I was covered in soot, especially then." He cupped her face in his hands. "I told you. I saw past the dirt to your soul." She turned her head and kissed his palm, a gesture so tender it made his chest tighten. "What are we doing, Harrison?" "I think we are falling in love." The words hung in the air between them, truth and possibility and risk all tangled together. Marianne searched his face, and whatever she saw there made her eyes well with tears. "I think we are too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me. It terrifies me too." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "But I am not going to run from it, are you?" "No." She kissed him again, longer this time, and he felt her pour all her fear and hope and longing into it. When she pulled back, she was smiling through her tears. "I am not running." That night, they sat together on the porch wrapped in a single blanket, looking up at the stars and talking about everything and nothing. Harrison held her against his side, marveling at how perfectly she fit there. They talked about the future in tentative terms, both still careful not to assume too much, but the conversation itself was a gift. "I want to learn to shoot," Marianne said at one point. "If I am going to live out here, I should know how to protect myself. I can teach you. And I want to help with the trapping this winter if you will let me. I am tired of being left behind while men do all the important work." Harrison smiled against her hair. "Trapping is cold and hard and often boring, but if you want to learn, I will teach you that too." "I want to learn everything." She turned to look at him. "I want to be your partner in all of this, not just someone you have to take care of. You are not someone I have to take care of. You never were." He kissed her temple. "You are strong and capable, and you would be fine without me." "But I am selfishly glad you do not have to be." She snuggled closer. "I am glad, too." The days that followed were some of the happiest of Harrison's life. He and Marianne fell into a new rhythm, one that included stolen kisses and long conversations, and the slow building of something deeper than either had expected to find. They were careful with each other, both aware of how new and fragile this thing between them was, but every day it felt a little less fragile and a little more real. Harrison taught her to shoot, starting with his lighter rifle and working up to bigger weapons. She was a quick study, as he had known she would be, patient and focused and determined to learn. By the end of the first week, she could hit targets at 50 yards. By the end of the second, she was hunting small game on her own. "I never knew I could do this," she said one morning after bringing down a rabbit for their dinner. "I always thought hunting was something only men could do. Hunting is something anyone can do if they learn how." Harrison took the rabbit from her and showed her how to dress it properly. "Your sex has nothing to do with it, only your willingness to learn and practice. My father would have been scandalized. Your father loved you and wanted you safe, but maybe his idea of safe was too limiting." He handed back the prepared rabbit. "Out here, the more skills you have, the better your chances of survival. Man or woman does not matter to the wilderness." She considered that as they walked back to the cabin. "I like that. The idea that out here I get to decide who I am, what I can do." "You always got to decide that," Harrison said, "but I am glad the mountains are helping you see it." In early September, they made the trip down to El Dorado together. Harrison needed to trade furs and restock supplies, and Marianne wanted to see the town she had only visited a handful of times in her life. They rode Storm together, Marianne seated in front of Harrison with his arms around her, keeping her safe and steady. El Dorado was a rough mining town that had sprung up during the Colorado Gold Rush and held on through boom and bust. The main street was lined with false front buildings, a mix of legitimate businesses and establishments of less reputable nature. The boardwalks were crowded with miners, merchants, cowboys, and gamblers, all trying to make their fortune or at least survive another day. Marianne pressed back against Harrison as they rode down the main street, and he could feel her tension. "It is all right," he murmured. "Stay close to me." They stopped at the general store first, where Harrison traded his furs for credit and began selecting supplies. The storekeeper, a balding man named Albert Morris, eyed Marianne with open curiosity. "Who is this, Drake? Did not know you had yourself a woman." "This is Marianne Palmer," Harrison said evenly. "Treat her with respect." Something in his tone made Morris's eyebrows rise, but he nodded. "Yes, sir. Miss Palmer, is there anything I can get for you?" Marianne looked at the shelves of goods with wide eyes. "I need dress fabric and thread. And maybe some ribbon if it is not too expensive. Let me show you what we have." Morris moved to the dry goods section, and Marianne followed, running her hands over the bolts of cloth with something like reverence. Harrison watched her from across the store, seeing how she hesitated over the nicer fabrics. her fingers lingering but her face showing the careful calculation of someone who had never been able to afford luxuries. When she finally selected a simple brown cotton, he came up behind her. "Get the blue one too," he said. "The one you were looking at, Harrison, I do not need. I know you do not need it, but you want it. Get it anyway." He put his hand on the small of her back. "Let me do this for you." She bit her lip, then nodded and selected a bolt of deep blue fabric that would match her eyes perfectly. Harrison also made sure she got the ribbon she wanted and extra thread and needles. When Morris tallied up the cost, Harrison paid without comment, ignoring Marianne's protests. Outside the store, she turned to him with a mixture of gratitude and exasperation. "You did not have to spend so much on me. I wanted to. Besides, I have been saving my money for years with nothing to spend it on. Let me enjoy spending it on you." He cupped her face and kissed her quickly, not caring who might see. "I love you, Marianne." It was the first time either of them had said it so plainly, without qualification or hesitation. Her eyes widened and a blush spread across her cheeks. "You love me." "I do. I think I have loved you from the moment I saw you standing in that charcoal camp looking fierce and beautiful despite everything the world had thrown at you." He stroked his thumb across her cheekbone. "You do not have to say it back. I just wanted you to know." "But I do," she said quickly. "Say it back, I mean. I love you, Harrison. I was just afraid to say it first in case you did not feel the same way." He kissed her again, longer this time, pouring all his feelings into it. When he pulled back, he was grinning like a fool. "We are both fools then. Afraid to speak when we felt the same thing." "Happy fools," she corrected, smiling up at him. They spent the rest of the day in town, and Harrison introduced her to the few people he knew. Word spread quickly that the mountain man had brought a woman to town, and Harrison endured more than a few curious looks and questions. But he kept Marianne close and made it clear through word and posture that she was under his protection. At the end of the afternoon, they stopped at the small church on the edge of town. The building was simple but well-maintained, with a white steeple that pointed toward the blue sky. Marianne looked at it for a long moment. "My mother used to talk about getting married in a church," she said quietly. "She married my father in their front yard with a traveling preacher officiating. She always said if they ever had enough money, she would like to renew their vows in a proper church." Harrison understood what she was not quite asking. "Would you like to get married in a church?" She looked at him, her eyes wide. "Are you asking me to marry you?" He realized he was. Not in a planned way, not the way he might have imagined if he had ever let himself think that far ahead. But standing here in the late afternoon sun with the woman he loved, it felt right. "Yes," he said. "I am asking you to marry me. Not today or tomorrow, but when you are ready. If you are ready. I love you, Marianne, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you, if you will have me." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Harrison lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, not caring that they were standing in front of the church where anyone could see. "Should we go in and talk to the preacher?" Marianne asked when they came up for air. "You want to?" She nodded. "I want to do this properly. The way my mother would have wanted." The preacher was a middle-aged man named Reverend Thomas Sullivan, who welcomed them warmly and listened to their story. He agreed to marry them in 3 weeks, giving them time to prepare and post the required notice. "It is unusual for couples to marry so quickly," he said gently. "Are you both certain this is what you want?" "I am certain," Marianne said firmly. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Harrison squeezed her hand. "As am I." Reverend Sullivan smiled. "Then I will be honored to perform the ceremony. Do you have anyone who can stand up with you?" They had not thought that far ahead. Harrison knew a few people in town, but no one he would call close friends. Marianne knew even fewer. "We will figure something out," Harrison assured him. On the ride back to the cabin, Marianne was quiet, leaning back against Harrison's chest. He could feel her thinking. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. "No, just thinking about everything that has changed in the last few months." She turned her head to look at him. "I went from tending charcoal mounds and watching my father die to being engaged to a man I love. It feels like a dream." "It is not a dream. It is real. We are real." "I know." She settled back against him. "That is what makes it so wonderful." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Marianne worked on her wedding dress, sewing by lamplight in the evenings and transforming the blue fabric into something beautiful. She refused to let Harrison see it before the wedding, insisting on tradition. Harrison used the time to make improvements to the cabin, adding a proper partition to create more privacy and building new furniture. He wanted their home to be as comfortable as possible. He also hunted and trapped, laying in stores for the coming winter. If they were going to be married, he wanted to make sure he could provide well for his wife. The word wife sent a thrill through him every time he thought it. Marianne Palmer was going to be his wife. After 5 years of solitude, he was going to have a partner, a companion, a love. It felt like a miracle. They made another trip to El Dorado a week before the wedding to finalize arrangements. Marianne needed to purchase a few more things, and Harrison wanted to commission a ring from the town's jeweler. He chose a simple gold band because he knew Marianne would not want anything too fancy, but he made sure it was well made and beautiful in its simplicity. At the general store, they ran into Horace Sterling, the merchant who had bought charcoal from Marianne's father. Sterling was a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers and a calculating look in his eyes. His gaze lingered on Marianne with an expression Harrison did not like. "Miss Palmer," Sterling said, tipping his hat. "I heard your father passed. My condolences." "Thank you," Marianne said stiffly. "I suppose that means the charcoal operation is shut down. Shame. It was a decent little business." His eyes flicked to Harrison and back to Marianne. "If you ever need employment, I could use someone at my warehouse. The pay would not be great, but it would be steady." Harrison felt Marianne stiffen beside him. "That will not be necessary," he said evenly. "Miss Palmer is going to be my wife." Sterling's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? Well, congratulations to you both, though I am surprised. I did not think mountain men went in for marriage. This one does." Harrison put his arm around Marianne's shoulders, making his claim clear. "Now, if you will excuse us, we have business to attend to." After Sterling had gone, Marianne let out a breath. "That man always made my skin crawl, the way he looked at me when he came to buy the charcoal. Like I was something he could purchase if the price was right." Harrison's jaw tightened. "He will never get the chance. You are mine now, and I protect what is mine." She looked up at him with a smile. "Possessive, are you, when it comes to you?" "Absolutely." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the late September sun bright in a cloudless sky. Harrison dressed in his best clothes, a white shirt and dark trousers he had purchased specifically for the occasion. He had even trimmed his beard and tied back his hair, trying to look as civilized as a mountain man could manage. When he arrived at the church, Reverend Sullivan was waiting with the church doors open. A few townspeople had gathered, curious to see the mountain man get married. Harrison nodded to them politely but kept his focus on the church entrance, waiting for Marianne. When she appeared, his breath caught in his throat. She had transformed the blue fabric into a simple but elegant dress that fit her perfectly, highlighting her slender figure. She had woven wildflowers into her hair, and her face was flushed with happiness and nerves. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She walked toward him with steady steps, her eyes locked on his, and when she reached him, he took her hands and held them tightly. "You are beautiful," he whispered. "You are not so bad yourself," she whispered back, her eyes shining. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They spoke their vows in front of God and witnesses, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When Reverend Sullivan pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed Marianne with all the love and promise he felt in his heart. The small gathering cheered, and for a moment they were surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations. But soon enough, Harrison and Marianne were alone, riding back to their cabin as the sun began to set. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Drake?" Harrison asked as they rode. Marianne leaned back against him, her head on his shoulder. "It feels perfect, like I finally found where I belong." "You belong with me, always." That night, in the privacy of their cabin, they truly became husband and wife. Harrison was gentle and patient, taking his time to show Marianne how much he loved her. She came to him with trust and desire, and together they discovered the joy and passion that came from two souls truly united. Later, lying together in the darkness with Marianne asleep in his arms, Harrison stared at the ceiling and felt a contentment he had never known. He had built a good life in these mountains, but it had been incomplete. Now, with Marianne beside him, everything felt right. He finally understood what home really meant. The first winter as husband and wife tested them in ways neither had expected, but in the best possible way. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, how to work together and give each other space. Marianne proved to be as capable in winter as she had been in summer, helping Harrison with his trap lines and learning to snowshoe through the deep drifts. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking and reading aloud to each other from the few books Harrison owned. Marianne taught him some of the songs her mother had taught her, and he found himself humming them while he worked. They played cards and told stories and made love with increasing passion and confidence as they learned what pleased each other. In the spring, Marianne discovered she was pregnant. They had been married 5 months, and the news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. Harrison became even more protective, insisting that Marianne rest more and work less. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, but insisted on continuing to do her share. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one afternoon after he had tried to stop her from lifting a water bucket. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine." "I know, but you are my wife and this is my child. Let me worry." She softened and kissed him. "All right, you can worry a little, but not too much." As her belly swelled with their child, Harrison found himself overcome with love and wonder. He would lie with his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby move, and marvel at the life they had created together. He talked to the baby through her belly, telling it stories about the mountains and promising to be the best father he could be. "What if I am not good at this?" he asked Marianne one night as they lay in bed. "I never planned to be a father. What if I do it wrong?" "You will be wonderful," Marianne assured him. "You are kind and strong and patient. You will teach our child everything important." "Like what?" "Like how to see past the dirt to someone's soul." She smiled at him in the moonlight. "Like how to be brave enough to open your heart even when it scares you. Like how to build a life in the wilderness and make it a home." Harrison kissed her gently. "I love you more every day. I did not think that was possible, but it is. I love you too, so much it sometimes overwhelms me." Their son was born on a crisp October morning, coming into the world with a loud cry that announced his presence to the mountains. Harrison had ridden to town to bring back a midwife, an experienced woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered half the babies in El Dorado. She guided them through the birth with calm efficiency while Harrison held Marianne's hand and tried not to fall apart. When it was over, and Marianne held their son against her chest. Harrison felt tears stream down his face. He had never cried as an adult, but the sight of his wife and child safe and healthy broke something open inside him. "He is perfect," Marianne whispered, looking at their son with wonder. "Look at him, Harrison. We made this." The baby had a shock of dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. His tiny fists waved in the air as if he was already ready to take on the world. Harrison reached out a finger and the baby grasped it with surprising strength. "He is strong," Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. "Like his mother and his father." Marianne looked up at him with tired but happy eyes. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never quite decided. Now, looking at their son, Harrison knew. "Henry. After my grandfather. He was a good man, strong and kind. I always wanted to be like him. Henry Drake." Marianne tested the name and smiled. "It is perfect. Hello, Henry. Welcome to your life." Mrs. Henderson stayed for 3 days to make sure both mother and baby were doing well, then left with instructions and Harrison's grateful payment. Alone with their new son, Harrison and Marianne settled into the rhythms of new parenthood. It was harder than either had expected. Henry needed to eat constantly, and Marianne was exhausted from nursing. He cried at odd hours, and neither of them slept much. But through it all, they supported each other, taking turns walking the floor with their son and finding joy in small moments. Harrison discovered he loved being a father. He loved holding Henry against his chest and feeling the baby's heartbeat. He loved watching Marianne nurse their son, the tender way she looked at him. He loved the fierce protectiveness that rose in him whenever he thought about keeping his family safe. As winter approached again, Harrison made sure they were prepared. He laid in extra supplies, hunted more than usual, and sealed every gap in the cabin to keep out the cold. He would not let his wife and child suffer. On the first real snowfall of the season, Harrison sat on the porch with Henry bundled in his arms while Marianne made dinner inside. He looked out at the mountains covered in white and thought about how much his life had changed. 2 years ago, he had been alone in this cabin, convinced he wanted nothing to do with the world. Then a soot-covered girl with blue eyes had looked at him across a charcoal pit, and everything changed. She had brought light into his darkness, warmth into his solitude, love into his careful isolation. "Your mother saved me," he told Henry softly. "I hope you know that when you are older. I was lost and she found me. She reminded me that being alone and being at peace are not the same thing." Henry made a small noise and Harrison smiled down at him. "You are going to grow up in these mountains, son. Your mother and I will teach you how to survive here, how to thrive. But we will also teach you to be kind, to see people for who they really are, to never judge someone by the dirt on their face or the state of their clothes. Those are the things that matter." The cabin door opened and Marianne stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron, talking to him again. He is a good listener. She came to sit beside them, leaning her head on Harrison's shoulder. "I was thinking we should go to town next month. I want to have Henry baptized in the church where we were married. I think that is a fine idea." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall and feeling complete. This was their life now. Not the solitary existence Harrison had once thought he wanted, but something infinitely better. A family, a home, a love that would last all their days. Over the next few years, their little family thrived. Henry grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved the mountains as much as his parents did. Harrison taught him to track animals, to read signs in the forest, to respect the wilderness that was their home. Marianne taught him his letters and numbers, songs and stories, the importance of kindness and honesty. When Henry was 3, Marianne became pregnant again. Their daughter, Rose was born on a spring morning with flowers blooming in the meadow. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's determination. And from the moment she entered the world, she had both her parents wrapped around her tiny finger. Harrison expanded the cabin to make more room, adding a second bedroom for the children and enlarging the main living space. He built a bigger porch where they could all sit together on summer evenings, and he constructed a barn for Storm and the milk cow they had acquired. The cabin that had once housed a lonely mountain man now rang with the sounds of family life. Children's laughter, Marianne's singing, the clatter of toys and dishes and daily living. It was chaos sometimes and loud and exhausting. Harrison loved every minute of it. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Harrison took Marianne back to the meadow where he had once brought her to see the wildflowers. They left the children with Mrs. Henderson, who had become a good friend over the years, and spent the day alone together. "I cannot believe it has been 5 years," Marianne said as they lay together in the grass, looking up at the clouds. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Best 5 years of my life." Harrison rolled onto his side to look at her. She was even more beautiful now than she had been as a young woman. Motherhood and happiness had given her a glow that no amount of soot had been able to hide. "Do you ever regret it, marrying me and staying out here instead of going to town?" "Never." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have. Love, children, a real home. I have everything I ever wanted and more." "So do I." He kissed her softly. "When I found you at that charcoal pit, covered in soot with sadness in your eyes, I thought you were the strongest person I had ever met. I still think that. But now I also know you are the kindest, the most loving, the best mother, the perfect wife. You are everything, Marianne." She kissed him back, deep and passionate. "Take me home, husband. We have a few more hours before we need to collect the children, and I have plans for you." Harrison grinned. "I like the sound of that." They made love in the meadow surrounded by wildflowers, the same flowers that had been blooming the first time he brought her here. It felt like closing a circle, like coming home in the deepest sense. As they rode back to town later to collect Henry and Rose, Marianne said, "I want to have more children, at least one more, maybe 2. Are you sure? Pregnancy is hard on you, I am sure. Our children are the best things we have ever done. I want to fill our home with love and laughter, and as many little Drakes as we can handle." Harrison laughed and pulled her closer against him on the horse. "Then we will have as many as you want. I am not going to argue with my wife about making babies." Over the next decade, they had 3 more children. Another boy, Thomas, and twin girls, Lucy and Sarah. The cabin expanded again and again, and Harrison built a second structure nearby to serve as a workshop and additional storage. Their home became a small compound, a thriving center of life in the high mountains. The children grew strong and capable, learning from both parents how to survive and thrive in the wilderness. But they also learned to read and write, to think critically, to question the world around them. Harrison and Marianne were determined that their children would have every advantage, including education. When Henry turned 12, Harrison began taking him on longer expeditions, teaching him advanced tracking and hunting skills. When Rose turned 10, Marianne began teaching her the finer points of tanning hides and preserving food. Each child was encouraged to find their own interests and talents, and the home was filled with their various projects and passions. El Dorado grew and changed over the years, becoming more civilized as the gold rush faded and legitimate businesses took over from the rougher elements. Harrison and Marianne made regular trips to town, becoming known as solid citizens despite their unconventional lifestyle. People respected the mountain man and his wife, who had carved out such a successful life in the high country. One autumn day when they had been married 15 years, Harrison and Marianne took a rare trip alone, leaving their older children in charge of the younger ones for a few days. They rode to a high mountain lake Harrison had discovered years ago, a place of breathtaking beauty that few people knew about. They camped beside the lake, and that night, sitting by the fire under a canopy of stars, Marianne said, "Do you remember the day we met? Every detail. You looked up at me with those blue eyes and my world shifted. I thought you were terrifying at first, this huge mountain man with wild hair and a beard looking at me so intently, I could not figure out what you wanted." Harrison chuckled. "I wanted to help you. And maybe even then I wanted to know you." "You saw me," Marianne said softly. "Really saw me. Not the charcoal burner's daughter, not the poor girl covered in soot. You saw who I really was underneath all of that. I saw a woman with strength and courage and beauty. I saw someone worth knowing. And I saw a man with a kind heart hidden under a rough exterior, someone who pretended to want solitude but really wanted connection." She moved closer to him and he wrapped his arms around her. "We saved each other, I think. We did." Harrison kissed the top of her head. "And we built something beautiful together. A family, a home, a life that matters." They stayed at the lake for 3 days, reconnecting as a couple apart from their roles as parents. They talked about their dreams for their children, their plans for the future, the contentment they felt in what they had built together. And they made love under the stars, their passion for each other as strong as it had been on their wedding night. When they returned home, their children rushed to greet them, full of stories about what had happened while they were gone. Henry had shot his first elk. Rose had finished the quilt she had been working on. Thomas had built a new rabbit hutch. The twins had learned a new song. Harrison stood on the porch that evening, watching his family move around inside the cabin, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life, this family, this love, it was more than he had ever deserved or expected. And it had all started with a chance encounter with a girl covered in soot who had looked at him with blue eyes full of strength and sorrow. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges but also joy and growth. The children grew into young adults, each finding their own path. Henry chose to stay in the mountains, building his own cabin nearby and starting his own family. Rose married a teacher from El Dorado and moved to town, though she visited often. The younger children were still finding their way, but Harrison and Marianne supported them in whatever they chose. As Harrison and Marianne moved into their middle years, they found themselves with more time alone again. The cabin that had once been bursting with children became quieter, and they rediscovered the simple pleasure of each other's company. "I do not miss the chaos," Marianne said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "but I miss having them all here. They are building their own lives. That is what we raised them to do." Harrison took her hand. "And we still have each other. Always." She squeezed his hand. "You are still the love of my life, Harrison Drake. After all these years, you still make my heart beat faster. And you are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, especially now, with silver in your hair and laugh lines around your eyes. You wear your life on your face and it is gorgeous." She laughed. "You are biased. Absolutely. And I am not sorry about it." When Harrison turned 50 and Marianne 46, they made the decision to build a smaller cabin closer to town. The high mountain winters were getting harder on their aging bodies, and they wanted to be nearer to their children and grandchildren. It was a bittersweet decision, leaving the place where they had built their life together, but they both knew it was the right one. The new cabin was smaller but comfortable, built with all the skill Harrison had accumulated over decades of mountain living. It sat on a piece of land just outside El Dorado, close enough to town for convenience, but far enough for privacy. They kept their original cabin for summer use, going back to the high country when the weather was good. As they settled into this new phase of their life, Harrison often reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a lonely mountain man and a desperate girl covered in soot to a couple surrounded by children and grandchildren, respected in their community and secure in their love. It was more than he had ever dared to dream. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their new cabin watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Marianne said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not stopped at the charcoal camp that day?" "All the time," Harrison admitted. "You would have survived." "You are too strong not to. But I would have stayed alone in my cabin, convinced I was happy when really I was just afraid. And I would have found some kind of life in town, probably as a laundress or a cook, working hard and getting by but never really living." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I am so glad you stopped, so glad you saw past the soot to who I really was. It was not hard to see. You were impossible to miss, even covered in dirt." He kissed her silver hair. "You were the light I did not know I needed. You still are. And you were my safe harbor, my home, my heart." She looked up at him with those same blue eyes that had captured him so many years ago. "I love you, Harrison, more than words can say. I love you too, until my last breath and beyond." They sat together in peaceful silence, watching their grandchildren play and feeling the weight of all the years they had shared. The struggles and triumphs, the joys and sorrows, the ordinary moments that had made up an extraordinary life. It had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Harrison Drake held his wife's hand and felt complete. He had found his purpose in loving this woman, in building a family with her, in seeing her for who she truly was beneath the surface. And she had found her strength in being seen, in being loved, in building a life that honored both who she had been and who she became. Their love story had started with soot and solitude, but it had grown into something beautiful and lasting. And as they entered the twilight years of their lives, surrounded by the fruits of their love and labor, they knew without doubt that theirs had been a life well lived. Together, they had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, in their children and grandchildren, in the values they had instilled, in the love they had shared. The mountain man and the charcoal burner's daughter had found each other against all odds, and in finding each other, they had found themselves. It was a simple story in many ways, but it was theirs, and it was perfect. And when their time came to leave this world, they would do so knowing they had loved fully, lived completely, and built something that would last forever in the hearts of those they left behind.